The laugh came first, not loud, not playful, but sharp and deliberate. The kind of laugh designed to carve space between bodies, to establish hierarchy without words. It sliced through the morning air outside Crestwood Academy's iron gates like a blade wrapped in silk. She stood there, a black, plus-size woman in a simple navy dress, her natural hair pulled back in a low bun, adjusting the straps of her son's backpack with careful hands. Her fingers moved with the practiced efficiency of motherhood, checking the zipper, smoothing the fabric, making sure everything sat right on his small shoulders. That simple act of maternal care was apparently enough to warrant scrutiny. The looks came next, scanning her body with the kind of clinical assessment usually reserved for livestock auctions. Eyes moved from her face down to her hips, lingered at her thighs, traveled back up with undisguised judgment. The visual dissection was so thorough, so deliberate, she could almost feel their gazes like physical touch. Unwelcome, invasive, reducing her to measurements and assumptions. Does she even fit in here? The whisper carried further than intended, or perhaps exactly as far as intended. The speaker, a blonde woman in expensive athleisure wear, didn't bother lowering her voice much. I mean, Crestwood has standards. Another voice joined in, this one belonging to a redhead clutching a designer handbag that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Probably a scholarship mom. You know how they're trying to look more diverse now. The way she said diverse made it sound like a disease. Look at her clothes. Target, maybe? Walmart? A brunette in yoga pants that had never seen the inside of a gym smirked behind her hand. God, I couldn't imagine. They laughed. That careful, controlled laughter of women who'd learned to weaponize politeness. The kind of laughter that masquerades as innocent while delivering calculated harm. She heard everything. Every word, every inflection, every carefully modulated note of disdain. The acoustics of privilege and exclusion were crystal clear. And she said nothing. Not because she was ashamed of her body. The body that had carried and birthed and nourished her son. The body that was strong enough to work 12-hour days. The body that moved through the world with more grace than these women would ever possess. Not because their words cut deep enough to silence her, but because she knew something they didn't. Something she'd learned through years of navigating spaces that weren't designed for her. People who mock you assume you have nothing. They assume your silence means powerlessness. They assume your presence is provisional, temporary, something they can revoke with enough social pressure. They assume you have nothing to take away from them. Her son, Marcus, squeezed her hand. At 7 years old, he was already learning to read the room, to feel the temperature of hostility directed at his mother. "Mom?" His voice was small, uncertain. "Are they laughing at you?" She knelt down, her knees protesting slightly against the concrete, and met his eyes, those beautiful brown eyes that held her entire world. She smiled, genuine and warm. The kind of smile that had nothing to do with the women behind her and everything to do with the boy in front of her. "No, baby," she said softly, brushing a hand across his cheek. "They're showing who they are. That's all. People always tell you who they are if you pay attention." Marcus looked uncertain, glancing past her shoulder at the cluster of women now pretending to be absorbed in their phones. But they were mean. Mean people exist everywhere, she told him, straightening his collar with gentle fingers. What matters is how we show up in the world, how we treat people. Can you remember that? He nodded slowly, and she kissed his forehead before standing back up, feeling every eye track her movement, every gaze cataloging her body as though its very existence was an affront to their carefully curated environment. She walked him to the entrance, said goodbye with another hug, and watched him disappear into the building before turning back toward the parking lot. The group of women had grown larger now, a small congregation of judgment assembled like a tribunal. As she passed them, one woman, the blonde in athleisure, made a point of stepping aside dramatically, as though contact might be contagious. The gesture was so exaggerated it was almost comical, except for the cruelty embedded in its performance. She kept walking, her head up, her stride even and unhurried. She'd learned long ago that rushing Looked like running. And she wasn't running from anyone. Behind her, the whisper started up again, emboldened by her departure. Can you believe the school lets anyone in now? I heard they're lowering standards across the board. Well, we're paying $40,000 a year. They better not dilute the experience. The word experience hung in the air like a euphemism for segregation. She reached her car, a modest but well-maintained sedan, nothing flashy, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, letting the morning settle around her. Through the windshield, she could see the school's pristine facade, all colonial architecture and manicured hedges, the visual vocabulary of old money and selective admission. She allowed herself one deep breath, then started the engine. Days passed, and the disrespect became routine, systematic, a choreographed exclusion performed with the precision of ballet. No one sat next to the black, plus-size mother during parent-teacher meetings. She'd arrive early, choose a seat in the middle of a row, and watch as chairs on either side remained conspicuously empty, even as the room filled to capacity. People would squeeze into overcrowded rows rather than sit beside her, performing elaborate social gymnastics to avoid proximity. Messages she sent in the parents' WhatsApp group went unanswered, scrolling past in the digital void, while other mothers received immediate responses to even trivial questions. She'd type out thoughtful queries about curriculum or school events and watch the read receipts accumulate. Everyone saw her messages. They just collectively chose not to acknowledge them. Conversation stopped when she approached, transformed mid-sentence into awkward silence or sudden departures. She'd walk up to groups discussing fundraisers or field trips, and the huddles would dissolve like she carried some social contagion, women suddenly remembering urgent errands or important phone calls. The exclusion was so consistent, so coordinated. It might have been impressive if it weren't so exhausting. But she didn't disappear. She didn't shrink herself, didn't apologize for existing, didn't perform the contrition they seemed to expect. She showed up to every meeting, every event, every parent volunteer opportunity, present, visible, undeniable. And while they reduced her to her body and skin, cataloging her existence through the narrow lens of their prejudices, she watched everything else. She noticed things. She noticed how Mrs. Patterson, the third-grade teacher, looked increasingly exhausted, dark circles deepening under her eyes as class sizes swelled without additional support. She noticed the library shelves growing barer each month, books disappearing without replacement. She noticed the art program being quietly dismantled, supplies dwindling, the teacher's hours cut. She noticed facilities falling apart in subtle ways, the gym floor developing soft spots that could injure children, the science lab equipment growing outdated and dangerous, the playground equipment showing rust and wear that should have been addressed months ago. She noticed complaints buried under fake smiles and performative enthusiasm, parents expressing concerns in hushed voices, quickly silenced by those more invested in maintaining the school's reputation than addressing its problems. She noticed numbers that didn't make sense, tuition increasing while programs decreased, budget line items that seemed inflated or missing entirely, financial reports that raised more questions than they answered. While they obsessed over her presence, her body, her perceived otherness, she saw the whole system. She saw the cracks, the weaknesses, the unsustainable trajectory of an institution trading on prestige while slowly collapsing from within. She started keeping notes, not in any official capacity, just observations, patterns, things that caught her attention. She had a background in financial analysis before Marcus was born, skills she'd set aside but never forgotten. Numbers told stories if you knew how to read them, revealed truths that people tried to hide. Then, 6 weeks after that first morning of laughter, came the announcement, a mandatory meeting. Everyone present. Important changes ahead. The email arrived with unusual urgency. The subject line marked high priority, the tone suggesting this wasn't optional. That morning, the laughter didn't show up. Instead, there was tension, uncertainty rippling through the usual crowd at drop-off. The women who typically gathered in their exclusive clusters looked worried, exchanging information in rapid whispers, trying to piece together what was happening. "Did you hear anything?" "My friend on the board said something about financial restructuring." "I heard enrollment is down. Are they closing?" She walked past them as always, taking Marcus to his classroom. But this time she felt their eyes on her differently. Not with mockery, but with a kind of anxious speculation, as though they were suddenly aware they didn't know everything about everyone around them. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the school's auditorium, a space usually reserved for performances and ceremonies. By 9:45, every seat was filled, standing room crowded, the air thick with nervous energy. She arrived precisely at 10, found a spot near the back wall, and waited. The principal, Dr. Margaret Chen, took the stage looking uncharacteristically serious. Dr. Chen was usually the picture of composed authority, but today something was different. A tightness around her eyes, a careful control in her movements that suggested the weight of difficult news. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Dr. Chen began, her voice carrying through the sound system. "I know there have been rumors, speculation, concern about Crestwood's future. I want to address those concerns directly and honestly." The room held its breath. As many of you know, Crestwood Academy has been privately held by the Morrison family for 3 generations. However, recent financial challenges, declining enrollment in certain programs, increased operational costs, necessary facility updates that have been deferred too long, have made it clear that the school needs new leadership and investment. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some parents looked angry, others frightened. Dr. Chen continued, speaking calmly about finances, structure, budget shortfalls, the difficult decisions that had to be made. Parents checked their phones, some clearly calculating whether they needed to start researching other schools, others probably drafting angry emails about tuition refunds. The tension built steadily, the atmosphere growing more charged with each revelation of institutional weakness, each admission of mismanagement. Then Dr. Chen paused, her expression shifting into something harder to read. Not quite a smile, but close. "Before we continue," she said carefully, "I need to formally introduce someone to all of you. Over the past 8 weeks, Crestwood Academy has been in negotiations for new ownership. Those negotiations concluded successfully last week. Silence descended so completely that the air conditioning became audible. I'd like to formally introduce the new owner of Crestwood Academy." Every eye in the room turned toward the side entrance, expecting someone to walk in, a businessman in a suit, perhaps, or a corporate representative, maybe even someone recognizable from local business circles. Instead, the black, plus-size woman standing against the back wall moved, slow, confident, grounded. She walked down the center aisle, her footsteps steady and unhurried, her body visible, undeniable, impossible to ignore. The same body they'd mocked, assessed, dismissed. The same woman they'd excluded from conversations and meetings, whose messages they'd ignored, whose presence they'd treated as provisional and unwelcome. She was wearing a different dress today, still simple, still elegant, but unmistakably expensive in ways that those who'd judged her target clothes would recognize. Her hair was down now, natural curls framing her face, and she carried herself with the kind of authority that doesn't need announcement. The faces she passed registered shock in stages, recognition, disbelief, dawning horror, rapid recalculation. The blonde in athleisure had gone pale. The redhead with the designer handbag clutched it like a shield. The brunette who'd mocked her clothes looked like she might be sick. She reached the stage, climbed the steps with easy grace, and stood beside Dr. Chen. From this position, she could see every face, every expression, every person who'd reduced her to mockery. "It's me," she said, her voice clear and steady, needing no microphone to carry. "My name is Dr. Diane Morrison Hayes, and I want to be very clear about something from the start. I didn't buy this school to prove anything about myself." She let that sit for a moment, watching it land, watching them process the hyphenated name they should have recognized. The Morrison that connected her to 3 generations of ownership, The legacy they'd assumed couldn't possibly include someone who looked like her. I didn't buy it for revenge. I didn't buy it to teach anyone a lesson, though I suspect some lessons will be learned anyway. She paused, her eyes moving across the crowd with deliberate slowness. I bought it because it was failing children. My child. Your children. All of our children. The shock began to transform into something else. Curiosity, apprehension, the uncomfortable awareness that they'd catastrophically misjudged not just her wealth or ownership, but her entire purpose. Some of you may have noticed me over the past several weeks, she continued, allowing the smallest hint of irony into her voice. I've been attending meetings, observing classes, participating in school activities. I've been watching how this institution operates, how it treats families, how it allocates resources. The blonde woman, Jennifer, her name was Jennifer, had tears streaming down her face now, silent and horrified. What I saw was a school trading on reputation while neglecting substance, rising tuition with declining programs, families paying premium prices for an education that was becoming less premium by the semester, teachers burning out without support, facilities deteriorating, and perhaps most troubling, a culture that valued appearances over actual excellence, exclusion over genuine community. She moved forward on the stage, commanding the space with natural authority. So yes, I bought the school. I bought it because my great-grandfather built it with the intention that it would serve children with distinction, regardless of who those children were or where they came from. I bought it because that mission had been corrupted over time, narrowed, weaponized into something he never intended. Doctor. Chen nodded beside her, clearly relieved to be handing over stewardship to someone who understood both the legacy and the problems. Starting next semester, Crestwood will implement several significant changes. Dr. Morrison Hayes continued, her voice growing stronger. First, we're establishing a robust scholarship program funded through a newly created endowment. 20% of seats in each grade will be reserved for students from families who couldn't otherwise afford tuition. These students will be selected based solely on merit and potential, not on their ability to pay. Some parents looked outraged, others looked thoughtful. A few actually looked relieved, as though they'd been waiting for someone to say this out loud. Second, we're implementing comprehensive inclusion policies, not as performative gestures but as operational standards. This means curriculum diversity, faculty training, explicit anti-bias education integrated throughout our programs. It means creating an environment where every child can see themselves reflected and valued. The redhead, Stephanie, raised her hand tentatively, then dropped it, apparently thinking better of whatever she'd been about to say. Third, we're investing significantly in our faculty and facilities. Teachers will receive competitive salaries, reasonable class sizes, and actual support. Our buildings, equipment, and programs will receive the investment they desperately need. Excellence requires resources, not just rhetoric. She could see the calculations happening across multiple faces. Parents weighing whether these changes were deal breakers, whether they'd pull their children, whether they wanted to be part of this evolution or flee from it. And finally, she said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal, we're establishing one non-negotiable rule that will apply to everyone here: students, parents, faculty, staff, administration. The room leaned forward almost imperceptibly. No child at Crestwood Academy will learn that bodies or skin color define worth. No child will be taught, directly or indirectly, through words or through the actions of adults around them, that some people matter less because of how they look. Any adult who teaches that lesson, whether they intend to or not, will not remain part of this community. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more fraught, carrying the weight of accountability. This is not negotiable, she continued. This is not up for debate or discussion. This is the foundational principle upon which this institution was built, and to which it will now return. If you cannot accept that principle, if you cannot model it for your children, then Crestwood is not the right school for your family, and I will personally assist you in finding alternatives. Some parents left immediately, standing up and walking out with performative outrage, making their displeasure known through dramatic exits. She watched them go without expression, understanding that this winnowing was necessary, even healthy. Others cried, some from shame, some from relief, some from emotions they probably couldn't name yet. A few approached her afterward, wanting to apologize, to explain, to somehow make right their earlier behavior. The meeting dispersed slowly, people processing, discussing, trying to figure out what this meant for them and their families. Dr. Morrison Hayes stayed on stage, available, answering questions with patience and clarity, making herself accessible to anyone who genuinely wanted to understand the changes ahead. Later, as the auditorium finally emptied, she walked out through the main entrance, ready to pick up Marcus from his classroom. The afternoon sun was warm, the campus quiet now, most people already gone. At the gate, Jennifer, the blonde in athleisure who'd made that exaggerated stepping aside gesture, stood waiting, her face blotchy from crying, her posture uncertain. "Dr. Morrison Hayes," she said, her voice shaking. I need to apologize. I'm so sorry. I judged you. I was horrible to you. I said things, I laughed, She trailed off, unable to continue. Dr. Morrison Hayes looked at her for a long moment, not unkindly, but not offering easy absolution either. "You didn't judge me," she said finally, her voice gentle but firm. "You judged a body you were taught to disrespect. You performed prejudices that were handed to you, that you never questioned, that felt natural because they were so normalized you couldn't see them." Jennifer nodded, tears spilling over again. "That's not an excuse," Dr. Morrison Hayes continued. "It's an explanation. What matters now is whether you're willing to do the work of unlearning those teachings, of examining why you believe what you believe about bodies and worth and belonging." "I am," Jennifer said quickly. "I want to. I want my daughter to grow up better than I did, to not carry forward what I carried forward." Dr. Morrison Hayes nodded slowly. "Then stay. Do the work. Show your daughter what it looks like to grow, to change, to choose differently. That's the apology that matters. The one made through sustained action, not just words." Marcus appeared then, running toward his mother with the boundless energy of a 7-year-old freed from classroom structure. She caught him, lifted him despite his growing size, and hugged him tight. "Did you have a good day?" she asked. "The best day," he said, grinning. "Mrs. Patterson said we're getting new art supplies and new books for the library. And she seemed really happy, Mom. Like, really, really happy." "Good," she said, setting him down and taking his hand. "That's how it should be." They walked toward the parking lot together, her son chattering about his day, about his friends, about the things that mattered in his world. Behind them, Jennifer watched, and beside Jennifer, a few other parents watched too, all of them seeing something they hadn't seen before, not because it wasn't always there, but because they'd refused to look. Dr. Diane Morrison Hayes didn't win because she was rich, though she was. She didn't win because she revealed her ownership, though that revelation had impact. She won because she refused to be invisible, refused to shrink, refused to accept that her body or her skin color should determine her place in any space. She won because she knew what they didn't, that dignity isn't granted by others' approval, that worth isn't validated by others' acceptance, that power isn't always visible until the moment it needs to be. And that ending, the one where the woman they mocked transforms the system that enabled their mockery, where accountability replaces exclusion, where children's futures matter more than adults' prejudices, that's the one that doesn't just satisfy. That's the one that actually changes things. That's the one everyone applauds, not because it's revenge, but because it's justice.